you ready to have a true, open, honest discussion about this whole Nolan Wells case? Huh? Okay, let's do it. What if Nolan had looked like this? What if he had been a white boy? You think for a second would not been handcuffed the motherfucking second they brought that phone back to that mama? Think for a second every major fucking influencer in the world would have been jumping on board on this, saying something's fishy about this? Because he's black, it's different. You don't believe me? Okay, let's do this real quick. Since July 4th, how many videos of these teen takeover mobs have you seen that look like this? Or this? And how many have you seen that look like this? I bet not a fucking lot. The simple fucking fact of the matter is, media, in particular, social fucking media, wants to paint the black community as a bunch of fucking wild animals. So that when situations like the Nolan Wells situations occurs, nobody gives a fuck. Well, you know what? That's why in my bio here it says champion for motherfucking all. I don't give a fuck about your race. I don't care who you fuck. I don't care about your politics. And I don't give a fuck about the color of your skin. Something about this case is fucking fishy. Something is off. And even if those boys didn't do it themselves, stop calling them his fucking friends, because they left that young man on the island with fucking strangers and he never came home. That's the bottom fucking line. Don't you dare tell me that if Nolan had looked like this right here, things would not have been handled differently, because they abso-fucking-lutely would have. Those of you in my comment section saying don't make this about fucking race, pull your fucking head out of your ass and wake the fuck up until you admit that people of all colors are treated fucking differently in this country. Specifically when it comes to shit like what happened to Nolan Wells, you will always be a part of the fucking problem and not a part of the fucking solution.
There is one question I want you to think about before we get into anything else. If Nolan Wells' phone could confirm exactly what happened in the hours before his death, why hasn't that answer reached the public yet? Not a theory, not a TikTok video, not somebody's interpretation of a blurry photograph. The phone, the actual device Nolan had with him. Because according to reporting, Nolan's phone made it back to shore. Nolan did not. And that simple fact has become one of the most important unresolved pieces of this entire investigation. Now, before you comment, I want you to hear me clearly. I'm not saying the phone proves foul play. I'm not saying it proves anyone lied. And I'm not saying anybody connected to Nolan's death is guilty of anything. What I'm saying is much simpler. If there are competing versions of what happened to Nolan, the phone is one of the places investigators should be looking for evidence that can separate fact from assumption. And right now, the public is still waiting to know exactly what happened with that examination. So let me ask you something, right at the beginning. If this were your child, would you want the phone examined immediately, or would you want both sides' forensic experts present when it happens? Tell me which one you think is reasonable in the comment section, because that question is at the center of what happened next. Nolan Wells was 18 years old when he went to Horn Island with friends over the 4th of July weekend. He was expected to come home. He didn't. His body was found in the water off Horn Island on July 6th. The official investigation remains ongoing, and an independent autopsy commissioned by his family was unable to determine a cause and manner of death, which were reported as undetermined pending further investigation. And that's where this story becomes complicated. Because there are things investigators know. There are things Nolan's friends have said. There are things Nolan's family believes. And then there are things nobody can answer yet. Those are 4 very different categories. And unfortunately, the internet has been treating all 4 like they're the same thing. They're not. So tonight, we're going to slow this down. We're going to separate what is documented from what is alleged, and we're going to focus on one question. What could Nolan's phone actually tell investigators? Think about how much information a modern phone can contain. Your location, your messages, your photographs, your calls, your applications, your searches, your account activity, and sometimes even information that you thought you deleted. But here's where we need to be careful. A phone is not a magical black box that automatically reveals every secret. Digital evidence has to be properly preserved, extracted, authenticated, and interpreted. That's why forensic examination matters. The question isn't simply, what's on the phone? The question is, what can investigators reliably establish from the phone? And in Nolan's case, that could be extremely important. Because his mother has publicly said that when the family recovered his phone, they were concerned about the lack of Snapchat content. She said she and her sister looked through his Snapchat accounts and found them empty, despite Nolan being someone she expected to have photos and videos from that day. Mississippi Today. Now stop right there. That does not prove somebody deleted anything, but it does create a question. And there is a huge difference between those two statements. A missing photo is a question. A forensic examination may help determine whether it was actually deleted, whether it existed somewhere else, whether it was synchronized elsewhere, or whether there is another explanation entirely. That's what we need to know. And this is where I want to hear from you. If you opened your child's phone and suddenly found an entire category of expected photos and messages missing, would you assume something happened, or would you wait for a forensic examination? Comment below, because your answer says a lot about how you approach evidence. Now let's talk about the part of this story that has changed significantly. There has been a public narrative that Nolan's family was somehow refusing to cooperate over the phone. But the family's attorneys have strongly disputed that characterization. According to multiple reports, the family and the Jackson County District Attorney's Office agreed on July 15th to a joint forensic examination. The family's attorneys say the proposed examination would involve experts from both sides, with possible FBI participation, and that the digital forensics lab at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College had been discussed as a location. But according to the family's legal team, no date was actually set. Then, in August, the dispute became public. The district attorney's office reportedly demanded that the family provide the phone within a short deadline. The family's attorneys responded that they were still willing to have the phone examined, but wanted the examination conducted under the previously discussed joint arrangement and with an agreed protocol covering things such as preservation, access, and handling. Then came August 17. The family said its forensic experts were on standby and offered the district attorney's office a window from August 18 through August 21 for the examination. And now we reach the question I want you to sit with. What happened after that deadline? As of the latest reporting I could verify, there had not been public confirmation that the joint examination had actually been completed. And that is an important distinction, because the examination was agreed to is not the same thing as the examination happened. So if you have seen someone online say the phone has already been completely analyzed, ask them one simple question. Where is the documentation? Not because they're necessarily wrong, but because that's how evidence works. And here's why this matters so much. The FBI is already assisting with the broader investigation. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office previously said the FBI was assisting with forensic examination of digital evidence investigators had collected. So this isn't a case where investigators have ignored digital evidence entirely. The real question is much narrower. What has been done with Nolan's own phone? That's the distinction. And it's a very important one. Because Nolan's phone was reportedly recovered by his family after it had been with one of the friends who returned from the island. His parents have said they questioned why Nolan would voluntarily remain on the island without his phone and keys. That concern has also been reported by major news organizations. Now again, Does that prove something happened to him? No. Could there be an innocent explanation? Absolutely. But if there is an innocent explanation, shouldn't investigators want the evidence that establishes it? That's what forensic examination is supposed to do. And this is where the story gets even more interesting. Because while the phone dispute has dominated the conversation, there is another digital trail investigators have already obtained: GPS data. And unlike someone's memory, GPS data gives investigators a sequence of recorded movements that can be checked. According to data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources obtained by CBS News, the boat that carried Nolan to Horn Island left a private dock around 9:56 a.m. on July 4th and arrived at Horn Island around 11:14 a.m. The boat left the island at approximately 4:31 p.m., and Nolan was not on that boat when it left. The vessel then returned toward the mainland, entered Fort Bayou around 5:52 p.m., returned to the dock around 6:06 p.m., and later went to the Fort Bayou boat launch around 7:19 p.m., before being transported over land to the owner's residence. Now here's where I want you to stop and think. The GPS doesn't tell us what happened to Nolan. It doesn't identify a suspect. It doesn't prove a crime. But it gives investigators something incredibly valuable: a timeline that can be compared against people's accounts. And that's the real power of digital evidence. You don't use it to prove the conclusion you already believe. You use it to test every version of the story. There is another piece of evidence that deserves attention: the emergency call from the boat. According to released audio, one of the young people on the boat contacted C2 because the vessel was taking on water after the bilge pump stopped working. The caller told the dispatcher that they were sinking. And when the dispatcher asked whether everyone was on board and okay, the caller responded that everyone was on board. But according to the accounts reported afterward, Nolan had remained behind on Horn Island. That doesn't automatically mean the caller was lying. It could have been a misunderstanding. It could have referred to everyone who was physically on the boat at that moment. It could have been said during a chaotic emergency. Or it could raise a question that investigators need to resolve. And that is exactly why we shouldn't decide the answer for them. We should ask the question: what exactly did "everyone is on board" mean at that moment? That's something investigators can potentially establish through the full recording, timestamps, witness statements, and other evidence. And that's much stronger than trying to identify voices from a compressed clip on social media. Here's another thing I want you to notice. The people who were with Nolan have been under enormous scrutiny online. Some have been accused of things that have not been established. Names have been circulated. Photographs have been analyzed. Videos have been slowed down. People have tried to identify voices. And strangers have built entire theories around individual frames. That's dangerous. Because once the internet decides somebody is responsible, every piece of evidence gets interpreted through that conclusion. A blurry object becomes a weapon. A shadow becomes a person. A pause becomes a confession. A missing photograph becomes proof of deletion. And suddenly, the investigation isn't about discovering what happened. It's about proving what the internet already decided happened. We shouldn't do that. If someone is innocent, the evidence should clear them. If someone committed a crime, the evidence should expose it. But either way, the evidence has to come first. And that brings us back to Nolan's phone. Imagine the examination finally happens. What could investigators potentially learn? They could look at the device's available data. They could examine application activity. They could examine communications and timestamps. They could look at location information where available. They could compare device activity against other digital evidence. They could potentially determine whether certain data was deleted or whether the apparent absence has another explanation. But there is something even more important. The examination could also prove the family wrong. And I think that's something people forget. Imagine investigators examine the phone and discover there was no suspicious deletion. Imagine the missing Snapchat material has an ordinary explanation. Imagine the phone's digital timeline is completely consistent with the accounts given by the people who were with Nolan. That wouldn't be a failure. That would be evidence. It could eliminate one of the biggest questions surrounding the case. And if the examination finds something different, then investigators have something concrete to follow. That's why the examination matters. Not because we already know what the phone will say, because we don't. Now, let's talk about the most important distinction in this entire story. Unanswered does not mean suspicious. Let me say that again. Unanswered does not mean suspicious. A missing answer can be frustrating. It can be concerning. It can justify further investigation. But it does not automatically establish wrongdoing. That's why I'm not going to tell you that Nolan's death was a murder. I'm not going to tell you that his friends killed him. I'm not going to tell you there was a cover-up. And I'm not going to tell you that law enforcement deliberately ignored evidence. Those are conclusions that require evidence. What we can say is that Nolan's death remains under investigation. His family continues to seek answers, and major questions remain unresolved. The state autopsy and other investigative material have not been publicly released, with the case expected to proceed through the grand jury process. That is enough, because sometimes the truth is compelling enough without us inventing pieces of it. And I want to bring this back to Nolan as a person, because it's easy to turn someone into a case file, a headline, a thumbnail, a name trending online. But Nolan wasn't any of those things to his family. He was somebody's son, somebody's teammate, somebody's friend, somebody who had a future. And his parents aren't asking the internet to solve the case. They're asking for answers. The people who were with Nolan deserve a fair investigation too. Investigators deserve evidence that can withstand scrutiny. And the public deserves to know what can actually be established. Those things don't have to conflict. In fact, they're supposed to work together. So here's where I want to leave you tonight. Not with a theory. With a question. What should happen next? Should Nolan's phone be examined jointly by the family's forensic experts, investigators, and potentially the FBI? Should the examination be completed first and explained publicly afterward? Should the public be given a detailed timeline of what investigators have already recovered? Or do you believe the family should simply turn over the device without conditions and let investigators handle it? I genuinely want to know what you think. And here's the bigger question. If the phone comes back with a timeline that completely contradicts what people have been saying, are you willing to change your mind? Because that's the test. Not whether the evidence supports your favorite theory, whether you're willing to follow the evidence wherever it goes. Nolan Wells doesn't need an internet team. He doesn't need strangers deciding who is guilty. He doesn't need another conspiracy built around a blurry screenshot. He needs the facts. And if that phone contains part of those facts, then the most important thing isn't what we hope it says. It's what it actually says. Until then, there are still questions. And the biggest one may be sitting inside a device that has been waiting for someone to properly examine it. So tell me below, do you think Nolan's phone could change this entire investigation? Or are we giving one device too much importance? I want to read your answer. And if you want this case covered with the evidence separated from the speculation, subscribe to Brian Case Records. Because when the facts change, we'll follow them.